Have you ever felt that your life needed a pause? That your heart is searching for answers, but doesn't know where to start? Path of Faith, Discoveries on the Path of the Soul, is not just a book. It's a journey, a real story of overcoming challenges, faith, and transformation that will inspire you to take the next step in your life. Discover how challenges can turn into lessons and how every moment can be an opportunity to reconnect with what truly matters. This book is for those who seek more than stories. It's for those searching for purpose, inspiration, and themselves. Available exclusively on Amazon. Link in the video description. Start your journey of transformation today. Path of Faith, Discoveries on the Path of the Soul. What are you waiting for?
My people, today we have a gospel that it can be understood superficially, which is to summarize the salvation that Jesus comes to believe in him. It could very well say that, I believe in Jesus, and I am already saved, since faith saves us, since belief in God is a guarantee of salvation. And we can make here a speech that did not imply so much, that it did not descend so much the staircases of the concept of belief. And we would be calm believing that believing in God is enough. But then we need to understand that believing is a dynamic verb that requires us commitment. Because I may well summarize faith in God in just having a theoretical formulation. I have a theory, and I guide this theory, and this theory is all that I believe to be important, to be true, and each one finds a way of believing in God. And we who are Christians are facing a text that tells us that believing in God is important. It is fundamental for us to be saved. And the concept of salvation is also very wide, because we cannot only think of salvation as a reality that will be delivered to us after death. No. Every Christian needs to live in constant state of salvation. And how does God save us? Believing in him. Having in it the reference that guides us to find the way we want to follow. That is why the concept of belief, it is dynamic, it is existential, it mixes in life. Because believing does not only mean professing, theoretically, a faith. Believing is you embodying what you believe. And in the case of Christianity, we can only be Christians if we embody the presence of Jesus, the person of Jesus, whom we find in the sacraments, which we find in the Word, which we find in confession, communion, which we find in coexistence. It is a privileged place of the real presence of Jesus. It is in the other. He said that, I am not inventing. At the end of the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus talks about the conditions to be saved. Visit when he is sick, giving food when he is hungry, be shelter when he is discovered. And the disciples asked, okay, but when did we see him hungry? When did we see him thirsty? When did we see it in need to be sheltered? Then he puts himself in the other's shoes, and he says, every time you have denied doing this to a minor of my brothers, mine, you are denying me. So you see, Jesus immediately identifies himself, has no mediation. Where there is a needy person, whether of spiritual health, physical health, spiritual food, material food, spiritual shelter, material shelter. There Jesus is present. Acid is present here in the Eucharist. Oh, but we don't want this commitment. That's too much for us. Yeah, I am sorry to inform that if we do not understand this yet, we do not believe. Because believing is not just repeating theological formulas, it is not just knowing color catechesis. It is to embody Jesus' proposal. And Jesus' proposal is that each of us could be where we are, with whom we are, their real presence. So he is in the one who helps. He is in the one he receives. And we, par excellence, because we are configured in it. We are beings of communion. To believe in God is to bring your desire to the world. And it is very interesting because in the first reading it says that we are with a hard head we have difficulty understanding. But a lot. We understand God what suits us. We are often adapted to a chewed Christianity. Easy to swallow. Often vain glamorized. How many times do we perceive ourselves within a Christian Christianity of spiritual vanity? Are we better than others? We are saved and others do not? How many times do you find a believer, I am not saying evangelical, that when I grew up, where I grew up, every time I spoke believer, it was the evangelical people? No. Believer is everyone who believes. So when you find a vain believer who feels better than others, who feels more special than others, for God lost everything from Christianity. It has been lost from Christianity for a long time, and the belief is not moving the heart where it needs to be moved. No, we cannot simplify Christianity and turn it into a theory that does not transform our lives. You need to transform our life. You need to transform our heart. The experience we make of Jesus, it will unfold in attitudes later. What's the point of coming here to commune? Participate beautifully, sing, hear the sermon. If I'm not a being of communion, what's the use of participating in the Eucharist? I have my sacraments up to date if I don't get the wave of hatred in the day. I'm being inconsistent. Every time I assume it is an instrument of hatred, and this is how the devil gains his place in the world. Who legitimizes the devil in the world is us. Because we all have the portions of kindness. No one is totally bad and no one is totally good. Now everything is creating, recreating, and multiplying. When I choose to be a person who legitimizes the presence of hatred in the world, of course, I am ceasing to legitimize the presence of good. There is no way I do both. At some point in your life, have you been able to be a good and bad person at the same time? At the same time, no. Sometimes you may have had the opportunity to, in fractions of a second, move from evil to kindness, or the opposite as well. Of kindness you pass, in a fraction of a second, evil. Why? Because everything in life is a choice. Until when we don't chose, it's a choice. Unfortunately, when I'm not choosing, someone is choosing for me. When I think I'm in the imperative of my will, someone is taking care of her. And that is precisely what has happened. The episode that is so recent by Vinny Jr. suffering that horrible attitude in a stadium full of people who left home to have fun. Those people left home because they wanted to see football. There are people who have no better distraction than football. And suddenly who started? It was certainly a person who gave the first racist, prejudiced, evil, devilish scream. And that was gaining body. Gaining body to the point of being staunch images. It gives us the feeling that the whole stadium is shouting offenses to that boy who left home to play his football. It is an easy example to understand how the devil gains the power to act in the world. When a person legitimizes his presence and moved by wickedness does, he has attitudes that hurt, who cheat, and then gaining fans, generating connections. And suddenly, that's why the crowd is so dangerous, because a crowd can easily become an instrument of hatred. The opposite is also true. Suddenly, it was missing in the crowd someone who shouted the different, who shouted a compliment, and that other people started to scream a compliment to that boy. But no. Unfortunately, at that time, what prevailed, what won was the hatred, was prejudice, it was racism, and nothing impoverishes us more as people than we feel superior to others, including religiously. Which is precisely what tells us here. Why am I saying that? Because many people believe in God, not the same way we, not as intensity as us, and sometimes have achieved much better results than us. You experience it small, you experience it greatly, because we are limited. Our limit is so great, my people, that we do not know how to live without each other. That's why we suffer when others leave our lives. The limit condition makes us think of the other as part of us. Because I am limited, because I have limits. I need to love. This is so beautiful, my people. Love is born from the limit. When we recognize that we do not realize our lives alone, the love of the other makes me live the experience of the complement. I get bigger because you love me, and I get bigger when I love someone. That's why suffering is natural when people leave our lives. That's why we miss so much that we miss the people who are special in our lives. Saudade is a realization of the limit. Longing helps us measure how much we love. Remove a person from your life. Think your life without that person, and you will find out how much you love you. It is limit experience. That's why love is pain. Love is suffering. And the more we dive into the ability to love, the greater our sensitivity to suffering. Then you will say, so Father, the more we love, the more we suffer. I am sorry to inform that it is. Because the experience of loving is the experience of playing the limity. So the suffering is so linked to love. Guys, we don't suffer when we don't love it. There are no causes to suffer when you do not love. But I ask you, is it possible to live in this life without the involvement of love? It's not possible. There is no love without suffering, no suffering without love. That's why we don't have to create an illusion within us. From today, my life will be beautiful. My life will have no difficulty. Unfortunately, this news we cannot give to lovers. The people who truly love in this life, they suffer from great causes, yes. They are not indifferent to the sufferings that are on the side. And that's why Jesus invites all his friends all the time to live the experience of love. Jesus' suffering. The suffering of Jesus was because he loved us. Be honest with you. The moment you have suffered most in your life is because it was the moment you loved it. Or because you have identified betrayed love, or because you have identified absent love. It's yours. Suffering often wraps with strange paper what is beautiful. Father. But isn't it beautiful to see a person we love? Yes. Because at that moment when it is leaving, very natural process of life, you are identifying that one day someone extracted the best. We don't cry for those who made no difference in our lives, guys. If we are suffering for some cause, it is because that is important to us. That's why we cannot despise the matter of our suffering. That's why we can't close the door and say, here you don't enter. How do you not enter? If he is right, stopped at the door to show what you have the most precious. I can't stop suffering because I can't stop loving. And I'm sure if you had to go through this process of choice today, you wouldn't want to. Suddenly you wake up and life is no longer the way you wanted. Suddenly the people you love go away. Suddenly people die tragically. It is childbirth again. It is my experience of being once again in the womb of life. Suffering the process of consumption and life expelling me. And now, what will you do? Then we reach the first point. I cannot change the fact that I have to suffer. You cannot change the fact that you have to suffer. So there comes a question. If I will have to suffer in this life, then I need to find out how to suffer. It is not so much why suffer, but how to suffer. How many times do you wonder, my God, why am I suffering that much? And do you get to any answer? Not always. We do not always find answers to the causes of our suffering. We are not always able to reach the answer of why the pain has knocked on our door. Now I ask you, if you can't get to the answer, or if you even reach the answer is no use much, it doesn't relieve the suffering you suffer. What is the other question you can ask? I can't change the pain. She's here. Knocked on my door. So now I need to find out how to suffer. Father Fábio, his blessing. I would like the Lord to withdraw a doubt. Why do we suffer so much when we love? My daughter, there is no way to stay with the good part of the business, right? Love is a donation. And every time I love, somehow I am coming out of myself. Somehow I am allowing the other to go inside my life. Within the context of my life. And it is natural that this bumps, that it hurts, that it causes difficulties that make us suffer. To love is that you give the other a space in your life, but at the same time, you accept it as it is. And the other being is not always totally favorable. Sometimes it is uncomfortable that provoke suffering or unpleasant situations that generate from their own coexistence. But then when we love, we are able to go over all this. Because the love we have is infinitely superior to what we dislike. The problem is, when what displeases us is superior to so much that we love, that's why there will be harder for forgive. When you don't have enough love to forgive, it's because the bad part of the other is prevailing. And then it is a carelessness that can happen throughout life. If we do not take care, we make the worst part of the other prevail. And that's a care that we need to have too, isn't it? Am I favoring what the other loves me? This examination of consciousness we always need to do because sometimes we want to wait. We keep waiting from each other whenever he loves us, that he treats us with love, that he treats us with respect. But we do not make our movement to treat us like this. So, it's a question that we will have the courage to play. Do I, with my way of being, favor people love me? Because, guys, sometimes we find people so boring, but so boring, that it is difficult to love them. And it is not that the other does not want to love. It is because the other puts a lot of obstacle with the very way of being. So we need to be careful, because if we get too bored, we will push people away from us. If we get too sticky, the other can't stand it. No one can handle sticky people. So be careful not to commit the exaggeration. You want to be loved so much by the other that you end up kicking. What? Putting your feet through your hands? You have the expression, right? Be careful not to force you too much so that the other wants well, so that the other loves you. Or that ends up causing the opposite effect. Love is natural, my people. Friendship is a natural process. The approach is a natural process. If it didn't happen, it is because it is not natural in that. We cannot demand that the other loves us. We cannot demand that the other wants us as friends. Now we can demand respect. And the respectful relationship, it always is very good for us all. So be careful not to allow the bad part of the person you love, which is part of your life, come prevail. Come prevail over the love you have for her. And you who are loved, be careful not to offer others too much your worst part and make this relationship difficult. Father Fábio, his blessing. I would like the Lord to withdraw a doubt. Why do we suffer so much when we love? My daughter, there is no way to stay with the good part of the business, right? Love is a donation. Every time I love, somehow I am coming out of myself. Somehow I am allowing the other to go inside my life. Within the context of my life, and it is natural that this bumps, that it hurts, that it causes difficulties that make us suffer. To love is that you give the other a space in your life, but at the same time you accept it as it is. And the other being is not always totally favorable. Sometimes they are uncomfortable that provoke suffering. They are unpleasant situations that generate off its own coexistence. But then, when we love, we are able to go over all this. Because the love we have is infinitely superior to what that displeases us. The problem is when what displeases us is superior to so much that we love. That's why there will be harder for forgive. When you don't have enough love to forgive, it's because the bad part of the other is prevailing. And then it's a carelessness that can happen throughout your life. If we do not take care, we make the worst part of the other prevail. And that's a care that we need to have too, isn't it? Am I favoring what the other loves me? This examination of consciousness we always need to do because sometimes we want to wait. We keep waiting from each other whenever he loves us, that he treats us with love, that he treats us with respect. But we do not make our movement to treat us like this. So it's a question that we need to have the courage to play. Do I, with my way of being, favor people love me? Because guys, sometimes we find people so boring. But so boring that it is difficult to love them. And it is not that the other does not want to love. It is because the other puts a lot of obstacle with the very way of being. So, we need to be careful. Because if we get too bored, we will ward off people from us. If we get too sticky, the other can't stand it. No one can handle sticky people. So, be careful not to commit the exaggeration. You want to be loved so much by the other that you end up kicking. What? It's putting your feet by your hands, right? It has the expression, right? Be careful not to force you too much so that the other wants well, so that the other loves you, or it ends up having the opposite effect. Love is natural, my people. Friendship is a natural process. The approach is a natural process. If it didn't happen, it is because it is not natural in that. We cannot demand that the other loves us. We cannot demand that the other wants us as friends. Now we can demand respect. And the respectful relationship, it always is very good for us all. So be careful not to allow the bad part of the person you love, which is part of your life, come prevail over the love you have for her. And you, who are loved, be careful not to offer others too much your worst part, and make this relationship difficult. Father Fábio, I still can't understand how people have so much faith. After all, in reality, what is having faith? I go to masses. I participate in the teams of Our Lady. I pray, evangelize every day. I believe in the existence of God. But I can't have this faith that my mother has. For example, please guide me about it. Am I sinning against God? You see, guys, it is interesting. Sometimes we have a temptation to think of our faith always in comparison. I always say that comparison is a very ungrateful way to live, or even qualify one thing. Qualifying a reality, for example. Comparing is ungrateful, because sometimes that situation, it does not deserve to be compared. It is unique. Everything we compare is in danger of creating injustice within us, or risks creating injustice outside us. Comparing is a strange way we have to commit injustice. And I always say that at the moment we are talking about faith, we have no right to compare anyone to anyone to anyone. Because otherwise we end up disregarding some aspects of faith that are suddenly more alive in one, less alive in another, but cannot be considered more important or less important. These are different aspects. Psychology teaches us, right? There are 3 very interesting perspectives of psychology. One that considers that the human being is the result of genetic conditioning. So he is what it is because he was given a genetics. The other, linear of behavioral psychology, will say no. That it is the result of the environment. I even had that famous phrase, right? Give me a child, and I make it. And an intellectual or a marginal. So it's that other chain that believes that the human being is the result of the environment. And I find it interesting that there is a third line that says, he's neither better nor worse because he is genetically programmed, right? Because it has a genetic load. He is neither better nor worse because he was created in this middle or not. That. He is different. So, he is not determined by either genetics or in the middle. He has a difference. And from this difference, the person is. The person is what he is. Then guys, There's a whole influence on what I receive genetically, what I receive culturally. Faith is born of this, my people. I believe according to the environment that provided me, the instruments of my faith. What is faith? Faith is that you have the possibility to believe in what you don't see. Because if you see, it is no longer faith. That's why I sometimes question some models of religion, where everything is very explained, everything very clear. Everything is very clean. Everything is very justified. No. Faith, it is born just what we can't see. I understand love, for example, as a form of faith. Why do you love that person? I don't know. It's an ungrateful question, isn't it? It's not like this. Doesn't love survive? One don't know either. He survives from what I know, but he keeps us next to each other is precisely for what we don't know about each other yet. This is faith. I have faith in you. This is beautiful, right? You'll take a shower. You never think. Do you have an acid in this soap? You do not think. You act from good faith. It is what makes him believe that a person has not damaged his soap. He did not make an attack on his soap. This is faith. Everything is experience of faith. You are here inside this theater. You are in faith that its foundations are solid. It won't fall on our head. Have you ever wondered if we started to doubt everything? You would no longer enter the supermarket because you think it falls. I don't get closer to that person because I think they will betray me. No. Everything is experience of faith. Now, how does it manifest itself before the sacred? All of this manifests itself in sacred faith from the experience we have as a person. The great injustice is when I want to compare my faith with my mother's, for example. Someone could say, Father Fábio, your mother has much more faith than you. I do not agree with that, because my faith is different from my mother. But I cannot say that one faith is superior to another. Everything we consider superior, people, generates prejudice, generates racism. Isn't it? Doesn't racism survive in the world precisely because people find themselves better than others? The same thing happens on the horizon of faith. We do not have the right to compare anyone's faith, so be careful. You have a specific way of believing in God. You have a specific way of living your experience of the sacred. Ready? Final point. The experience is yours. The way of seeing, interpreting, feeling this God is yours. It cannot be compared, because otherwise you start living that thing. I am better or I am worse. And in fact, we don't have to. Not even people who feel better. No people who feel worse. By the way, I think the problems of the world would be solved the day we put these questions before our eyes. You are no worse or better. It is just different. Religious tolerance is born of this. I can't feel better than you. So much so that there is a theologian that I like a lot. He always says, every religion has the right to live his Old Testament. You who already live, for example, you who are a Christian, who are already within the New Testament, you risk looking at the old one and talking like this. Our Lady, we are much better than them. Only there are people who are still in Old Testament, and we don't have the right to look at their context and say that we are better. No. Similarly, as I do not have the right to look at a person, suddenly, who has not studied any theology, and to say that he has no faith because I know a little more than she, right? Faith cannot be compared. Faith is a particular experience, unique. Unique. Even if this faith is universal, it will manifest itself very particularly in people. So we are very unfair every time we compare. This is good because it creates a humility within us. I'm no better than anyone, no one is better than me, we are just different. A first person talks here about the panic syndrome I had. My name is Lucia. I'm from Goiatuba, inland of Goiás. I follow the Lord very much in the spiritual driving programs. And when I don't watch, I see on YouTube, and it has helped me a lot. Because since January, I am undergoing treatment due to an anxiety disorder depression, and I still suffer a lot because inside me there are very poorly resolved things. When the Lord went through panic syndrome, showed me how much we should fight and never give up, and this is what I have always been doing, following the Lord and living one day at a time. I started to get God, and if it wasn't for Him, I wouldn't be here anymore. A big hug. Lucia. Thank you very much for your sharing. For the opportunity we have to reflect this question. Whenever I can, I bring here. Depression is a very serious disease. It is sometimes considered by many to be fresh and not. But it is good for you to realize, I saw that you are very attentive to it, from what you wrote, that you identify that there are things that are poorly resolved in your life. This is the starting point. Sometimes depression is just a consequence of a life that is being poorly lived, and no use taking the medicine only. If you do not move the cause, the medicine will treat the symptom, and you will be eternally depending on that medicine because you have not acted in the cause. And acting on the cause does not depend on medicines, it depends on our will. The medicine is very important to stabilize us, to give us emotional comfort, especially when we live acute pain. A person, for example, when it goes through a traumatic situation, it is possible that the doctor indicates some medications to help live that acute phase. But then the doctor himself helps to remove, because he passed the acute phase. Then we need to deal with the situation that saddens us. I remember a couple of weeks ago I shared here with you, just as I identified that I was living a certain numbness, nothing was bothering me. Everything was very good and I was a great person. Because you see no problem at all. But I'm not like that. I'm not like that. And I realized, very consciously, that this was a result of medicines in me. So I searched my doctor and asked her to be who I was, and consciously administer my situation again. Of course, panic syndrome is very dangerous. It can lead to death if we don't take care of it. So in this acute phase, we really need the medicine. But then as we go over, we have the right and the need to start recruiting our own resources. That the big problem, my people, is when we do not face the problem that depresses us. That is sometimes a life structure that has not been modified. Sometimes it is a job where you are not happy. Sometimes it is a relationship that you are doing you very badly. And you have not had the courage to establish a new way of living this relationship. Sometimes it is a state of life that is doing you harm. And if we will not live the confrontations of the situations that depress us, that saddens us, the medicine will only postpone the pain. Unfortunately, it is like that. I am very worried about seeing how easily we refer to the medicines and how we have. Because we are very easily being referred to the medicines, we are procrastinating, postponing to touch those wounds that is necessary for them to be healed. So, Lucia, I am very happy that you are conscious and that despite the emotional suffering you live, you are finding our program here. That is also in my preaching on YouTube. One word, it has the same effect as a tablet sometimes. It causes a well-being within us. It causes hope, and that is very good. And we cannot give up. I have a friend, a family very close to me there in Campina Grande, who gave up last week. He killed himself, drank poison in front of his children. A very sad situation. An emotional maladjustment that was already evolving and suddenly happened. This we know is very common. A lot of people give up on life. I'm not afraid to say, I wanted to give up in July this year. My suffering was so great that I wanted to cease to exist. I couldn't live with that suffering anymore. I was so sharp inside me that I lost the desire to live. But this is temporary. If we take care, we say again, we take the medicine at the right time. Look for the professional at the right time. And then you start to refer with occupational therapies, change of habit, change of food. I already said this once. I have a great admiration for Margarita Felix, who is a psychologist from Recife. She has a very interesting job, that it is the recovery of depressed people through habits change and feed change. A very serious researcher. She's a very serious researcher who surrounded herself with good professionals and was picking up research around the world, was bringing into her institute in place her work. And how many people were recovered from depression, healed from depression? Changing habits and changing food? Yes, because depression is also chemical, not only motivational. Sometimes the person is sad. It is not because he has a reason to be sad. It is because he is chemically disorganized. What is the chemistry of our organism but our food, our hormonal production, which is all stimulated through habits? We know that physical activity has the power to help regularize our hormonal production. So there are so many things to do. We need to be less lazy in hand with us. Sometimes I get very worried, Jocelyn, that I find very accommodated people in the capsules. Do not change their behavior. So they will depend on this medicine forever. Suddenly that medicine has no effect. You need to go to a stronger, and it has no end. It is a very serious danger. A very serious danger these days. This accommodation of people not to change what is actually killing. What is actually doing.
As we bid farewell on Path of Faith, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your presence. Keep the conversation going by commenting below, liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel for more soul-nourishing messages.